Welcome to this edition of our Thought to Action Great Reset Roundtable, presented by the Herb London Center for Policy Research. I'm Chris Cordani, your host. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to hit that like button. Also, comment, share, and subscribe. To enjoy sneak previews of our videos, exclusive content, more special programming, and this video in its entirety, join our Patreon page, patreon.com/thoughttoaction. As a subscriber, you'll also have access to our Ask Us Anything sessions, where we at the London Center answer your questions. Also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Getter, and our website, londoncenter.org. The Great Reset, formulated by Klaus Schwab and his World Economic Forum and endorsed by the likes of Joe Biden and Justin Trudeau, has been described as akin to either a forward-thinking grand idea and a plutocracy disguised as an ice cream sundae. Either way, the plan is for a select few to create a coalition to run a world order. With all of the nations, leaderships, and religions involved, how does the Davos gang, as well as its followers, plan to go about slanting us towards such a plan? Our panel from the London Center is here to discuss. We have London Center President, Lieutenant Colonel retired Tony Schaefer, London Center Senior Fellow, Lieutenant Colonel retired British Army Tim Wilson, and London Center Distinguished Fellow, Navy Captain retired Pete O'Brien. Welcome, gentlemen. One of the important tenets of Klaus Schwab's Great Reset is to move people from the third world countries into Europe and America to weaken national unity in the West. That means weakening borders. Also bringing in what Schwab perceives as, we'll say, more compliant voters into the West to allow a Great Reset to happen. That's his perception. Joe Biden's willful ignorance of the southern border, as well as easy and not well-vetted immigration policies in the UK and France, play a part as well. What are your thoughts?
Chris, it's a great question. I was just reading a bit about Klaus Schwab. Let me read a little bit about Klaus to our audience. Born in Ravensburg, Germany, 1938, Klaus Schwab is a child of Adolf Hitler's Germany. Wow! A police state regime built on fear and violence. So apparently he was born during this nightmare time, and he seems to have dedicated his life to reinventing the nightmare that was the Nazi Germany. And basically one of the things that I often say, and other people say too, never trust a German with a utopian vision of economic control, global control. And that's what we have here. So when you see this quote unquote open borders concept he preaches, it's not about open borders, it's about open borders to what they want to do. It's essentially what they want is a form of feudal mercantilism, where you have nation states, city states, nation states, which are all essentially working towards this quote unquote collective good that he and other elites control. This is not about power down. This is about collectivism. And when they talk about all this open border stuff, it's for purposes of ending the traditional borders globally. So it's basically the idea is to end the current social construct of the world for purposes of creating these smaller but very influential city-states that are basically answer to this larger global order. And you can just go on their website and see this if you're careful. I read 2 days ago of this taping. He put out this statement about how resilient, it's time for us to really get behind resilient societies and all this other. It's all platitudes. There's nothing there. And I don't know how people don't see this. It's all this, it's the same Hitler-style platitudes revised for the 21st century, where everybody's a victim. You need to throw off your victimhood and join us. We will make you better. You're going to be happy because of what we can provide you, not what you can do, but what we can provide you. We can provide you all this guidance. You need to be part of our society. It's very dangerous rhetoric. So when you see this, it's not about benefiting individuals. It's not about, oh, we're all going to be better. It's all about trying to consolidate power into a few centers that they control internationally to eradicate the existing nations, which actually do, I believe, protect the interests of their people. They don't want America first. They don't want Poland first. They want this amalgam of just unified misery. We're all equal. We're all going to be equally miserable, and we're going to, be happy to let Amazon, let Apple control our technology. They will give us what we need. You'll own nothing and be happy. So that's where I see this all going. So
there are certain warning flags involved in the whole thing. If you think about where this comes from, the World Economic Forum held in Davos is basically by invitation only, and pretty much an audience of billionaires and their best advisors. Mm-hmm. And if you think about the strategic level economics of what's involved, what we're really talking about is using virtue signaling and making claims that it's all for the greater good to cement and increase the wealth of that group.
Exactly.
I've been reading, in fact, the last few days, the recently released, at least as I saw it, the Global Economic Forum's essentially view of the world 2022. And in it, they have a series of arguments, and really the arguments, if you will, distill down to just a few key points. And the first one is that there is a series of regional employment crises. They point out that there are not enough people who want jobs in the United States. That of course is a careful working of the statistics. When you only have 61% of the workforce is participating in the United States, it's hard to say that there are not people who want jobs. So there is the issue of jobs. There is the issue of climate change, and then which is, of course, is another interesting problem, because while there is on one side a lot of arguments for the idea that climate's changed, of course, the answer is yes, they do. They do it all the time. That's what climates do. The question is does mankind's industrial activity in any way materially affect those changes? And
I want to talk about that in a second when you're done. So
one can say that they do, except one would then need to go back and look at the raw data, and the raw data doesn't support that conclusion. The warmest decade of the last 150 years was the 1930s, so there's the issue of climate change, and then there is, of course, the issue which wonderfully sprung up here, the issue of global pandemics. And of course, their response to this is the only way that these global issues can be dealt with is through global governance. You can't solve a global problem without global governance. Global governance needs to be established, and as a result, there will be a more equitable solution to all. Everybody will benefit, except, of course, some people, a small slice will benefit more than others. Be that as it may, I would just simply ask the listener to consider this one point. If you paid attention to the struggle with the school board in Loudoun County, and how a governing body, if you will, that close to the voters was so resistant to change, and then ask yourself how resistant to input from the people is going to be a global governing body located someplace in wherever, Switzerland or Vienna, or some super secret Dr. No lab floating around the South Pacific. The idea here that somehow a group of perhaps 500 billionaires and their political junkies will somehow come up with a better answer than you will for how you are going to live is truly an astounding conclusion. But that really is the heart of it. The real heart of it is global governance, and global governance is not going to be global democracy or global republic. It's going to be global autocracy. It's going to be a very small group, an oligarchy, with just on top of that oligarchy, a very small number of people, a dozen or so, who will be driving everything. And they speak to this directly, the need for global governance, global control, global rule sets, global parameters for all behavior. That's all in their grand discussions. And the numbers I'm reading right now here on their forecast for the world economy.
In this thing I saw the other day with Klaus Schwab, I think it was the last day of January of this year, he acknowledged the fact that over the pandemic, there was the largest transfer of wealth from the middle class to the elites. And that's a good thing. Oh, well, this just says that we need to, be more inclusive. Nobody at the billionaire level is going to share any of that. It's like, I don't know how you don't see that. It's like, oh, yeah, this was good. No, it was bad, because it actually did put out of business here in the United States all these mom and pop small businesses. It consolidated power to a handful of elites. And what's always bad about collectivization, two things, is that first off, I would argue global control of mechanisms relating to the economy or energy negates the ability of actual application of solutions to real issues, because what would work in Minot, North Dakota, is not going to work in Sanford, Florida. It's just insane. You can't do it. One size does not fit all. But I think they want that. I think that's what they want. They don't care about in-state solutions being implemented correctly. It's all about control and basically trying to subjugate everybody so that they can use that chaos for purposes of maintaining their autonomy, autocracy. And I think it's very dangerous. And this other thing, again, for our audience to remember, I do have a degree in environmental studies. Everything they say about climate emergency is a lie, a complete lie. There is no climate emergency. Weather is weather. I noticed any given day, I live down in North Carolina, our forecast will change between Wednesday and Saturday. And I mean dramatically sometimes. So if you can't figure out weather within a few weeks, you cannot figure out global climate. At first, second point, CO2. CO2 is the big enemy. It's always about, oh, we need to fight. One of the reasons that Paris climate accords failed, it wasn't because of us, despite what they're going to say about Donald Trump pulling out. It wasn't. Most member signatories recognized very early on that the expensive fixes that were suggested would have zero impact on anything. If everything was religiously implemented within the climate accord in 2100, let's see, where are we at? Yeah, right. 2100, we would have affected climate by less than climate temperature by 0.02. Less. That's barely measurable. That is to say that if you did everything they suggested, you go to every Western nation, you cut their CO2 production by 2100, the year 2100, you would barely have any impact on climate. Maybe. Impact, you don't even know.
Tony, if I can just add in there, yeah. If you think about, they're talking about it being a climate emergency where the temperature of the world, of the planet, on average, might warm by 2 degrees. I defy anybody without a thermometer to go outside and tell me within 2 degrees what the temperature is. You can't tell the difference. And all the innovation that we've had, all the technology advances we've had have produced the ability to live in places where previously we couldn't.
That's my next point.
Things like air conditioning matter.
Well, look, Tim, I would argue that a higher global temperature with longer growing seasons is a good thing. I don't think that's bad. Anyway, my point being is, if anybody who has doubt about what I'm saying, go back and study geologic history. And you tell me why we had a boring billion years, where there was a billion years of virtually no change. How much did we have impact on it? Did we go back in a time machine and somehow adjust the environment for a billion years? Does anybody understand how long a billion years is? We had no impact. We have no understanding. So now to have these politicians, not scientists, come forward and say we have a climate crisis is simply another method of control they're trying to implement to use your good nature, because a lot of people feel that they want to be I want to help. They're trying to get you to give up your freedoms for purposes of tricking you into thinking that you can help stop the climate emergency by giving them money and power. It is a complete sham. So as Tim just said, even if you did see 2 degrees, we're talking about scientists saying 0.02 degrees, potentially. To give up everything to do that is insane. It's completely insane.
One of the arguments that is commonly used is, well, we have to affect it somehow, don't we? We've done all these things. There's all these extra people. There's all these extra machines. Blah blah blah. And the answer, of course, is, well, that depends, and it depends upon whether the system you're in this particular place and time. We have to be in a system that is the entire planet. The system can be, if you will, the term of art is dynamically stable, which means if you conduct a certain amount of change on one side of the problem, the system will somehow respond and balance things out. And there's a lot of cases in that that we observe on a daily basis around the universe. There are dynamically stable systems. And you can make a very sound argument that, in fact, the Earth is dynamically stable, that as you add energy to one if you will, part of the globe, the weather system, the entire geosystem compensates, and the system remains essentially stable. So the idea, the insistence on some people's part that, no, well, it had to have some effect, wouldn't it? And the answer is well, it may have, it may not. And frankly, we don't have anywhere near the database to understand what in fact is going on. If you have any mathematical ability, I would ask you to go take a look at the mathematical models we use for cloud formation over the ocean.
Right.
And if you can come up with a better answer, and I'm sure you probably could if you worked on it, because the one we have is pretty poor, you'd be amazed at just how loose and generic that model is.
May I just then I'd just like to throw in as well, if we've gone through the pandemic and seen, if you like, government direction having very little practical effect. If you look at the climate thing, I'm old enough to remember that back in the 1970s, it was all about the coming ice age. That then turned into the global warming movement. Around the sort of 2010, that was killed off because the data wasn't supporting it, and it became climate change. Now we've shifted back where it's still climate change, but if you actually look at all the claims they're making about the coming disasters, they're all to do with this supposed warming, which isn't happening. We know that. Satellite data is solid on that. The sea levels, Al Gore bought a seaside home for good reasons, not because he believed it was going to vanish within the next 20 years.
You mentioned, Tony, the Paris Accords, and let's say enough people have fallen for the junk science. And let's put it this way. This has been penned into our heads going from elementary school on forward from the 1970s into now. So there are going to be a lot of people who believe this because, hey, the teachers said that every year I was at school. All my favorite commentators are talking about it. The newspapers are saying it. The thing is, what if they all believe it? The fact is the Paris Accords don't even handle that aspect of climate change. They're basically another, let's say, I'm not even going to say this because you can say that you can argue that the World Economic Forum was planning this Great Reset idea for a few decades, or at least a recent decade or two. The idea is larger nations were to kick in a large amount of money. The U.S. was slated to push in $10 billion a year, every year, to this Paris Accord. The recipient nations were never under any requirement, not required at all, to comply or do anything with that money to improve their emission standards. That should tell you something.
China basically gave it lip service, and all the developing nations who were going to benefit from this had no plans to really curtail their production of CO2, because it would mean the ending of their economic capability to support their people and their economy. It's insane. So it's this, but this is one of the prime economic grifts of the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. They say this over and over. If you look at what they say, it's always climate crisis. It's always climate crisis. there is no climate crisis. This is all artificial. This is all psychological, and it's being done to drive people into this belief that, oh, I must do something or else the world's going to end. What did Ocasio-Cortez say? It was like 10 years.
2030.
Like
2030. That's a big one.
Yeah.
But she's not the only one. She's not the only one, Tony.
I know she's not the only one.
2030 was the key number. It used. Remember when the UN had Agenda 21 as one of their huge tenets? Well, apparently Trump's election brought that or set it back a few years. The UN now has Agenda 2030. It coincides with the Great Reset. We're going to talk about how Build Back Better does the same exact thing.
Right.
But the idea is you'll hear liberal politicians, Kerry, Biden, Trudeau, Ocasio-Cortez, they all seem to add the number 2030 or somewhere around there into a goal to get certain things done, whether it be climate change or another buzzword, another virtue signaling buzzword that we're going to talk about. The World Economic Forum loves this one, equity.
Equity.
Right. There's no longer treating people equally. We have to have equity and sustainability. Those are two things that make people think, well, I want to treat people equally. So they don't understand that equity and equal don't exactly mean the same thing.
They don't.
But it sounds good. And that's the idea. One of the ways the Western nations are helping the World Economic Forum comply with the Great Reset is media and verbal manipulation of the public.
Well, two things on that real quick. So science is not something that functions well when you suppress information that relates to experimentation, tests, and outcomes. Science, you need to look at outcomes based on scientific testing and observations, not opinion. But that's what they keep doing. And that's, if you watch carefully, Chris, what they do, they don't say it's disinformation. I know disinformation is completely flat out lies. What they say is people put out misinformation. What is misinformation? It's like, it's not disinformation, it's misinformation. It's misinformation because it's what they don't want to have you talk about. It's misinformation because it's not what the narrative is that we want to have put forward. And watch it carefully, because people kind of overlook this. My friend Ron Coleman pointed this out in an interview that we'll have up here soon, where he says, look, have you noticed, and I hadn't really internalized it, they're not saying it's disinformation, they're saying it's misinformation. So they're not even saying technically it's wrong. It's like, you told me to take exit 17, it was really exit 18. You gave me misinformation. They're trying to basically imply that that's what's, it's not really, you're not lying, you're just misinformed. And this is where they're trying to use that as a wedge to try to get everybody silent. So it's something for people to pay attention.
In their report here, there was a page about risks, the global risks. And under the heading of global risks, they have 5 statistics. 6% vaccination rate in the poorer parts of the world, 97% public debt to GDP, worldwide average, 51 million people in extreme poverty, 197 countries aligned on the Glasgow Climate Pact, 84% of exports are worried or concerned about the world. Those are 5 completely separate statistics, which they've just put up there in order to paint a picture that things are horrible. But no place in here does anyone really talk about, well, what are the norms? What are the standard deviations? How statistically do you understand these things? No one to present a number these documents are full of these kind of things. To present a series of numbers to somebody without placing them in any sort of context is at best foolish and is most likely an attempt to mislead. I'll give you a simple one that people understand. This guy only gets a hit 3 times out of 10. Well, in baseball, if you're hitting 300, you're doing damn good.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you presented that to somebody who never played baseball before, presented that to somebody who understood cricket and didn't understand baseball, it would sound strange. But the fact of the matter is the guy's he's hitting 300. He's in the top 10 in professional baseball. And so one of the things you'll see all the time is these series of statistics. And the one I love the best is 84% of experts are worried about the world. What does that mean? I mean, seriously, pull that one apart. 84% of people are worried about the world. First off, I'll throw out this one thing from one of the real great minds of the 20th century, Richard Feynman, a nuclear physicist, worked on the bomb, a brilliant guy. Feynman was fond of saying that science is the questioning of experts.
Exactly.
So whenever you hear a whole bunch of experts believe X, the first thing you should do is grab your wallet and don't let anybody near you, because certainly they're coming for your money. The next thing you do is doubt everything that follows in that statement. Experts believe. As soon as you hear that, doubt the rest of the sentence. But I'd also add one final thought here for this particular issue is I would just ask the listener to think about one thing when we start talking about this organization that's going to come up with all these answers. Look down your street. Just walk out in the street, walk out in front of your house, look down the street, look at the neighbors' houses. And now I want you to pull out a notepad and decide what those people are going to do for the next 12 months. Don't talk to them, just tell them what they're going to do. You're going to write it all out. See if that makes sense. And then now remove yourself by 4,000 miles and do it and say, okay, I'm going to tell you what everybody in Switzerland is going to do for the next 12 months. That's what global governance is all about.
Yeah.
And if I'm just a quick bit of history in all of this, if you look back at where did the climate change, global warming movement kind of originate, it began very much, anybody remember the Rio conference back in 1973? That was set up by a guy called Maurice Strong, who was a deputy secretary general of the United Nations, an advisor in the end to Kofi Annan. Maurice Strong, interesting history. When he was eventually indicted as an unindicted co-conspirator under threat for oil for food, he ended up moving to Beijing. I'll just point out that I go back to follow the money. If you look at the Davos conference, if you look at the World Economic Forum, it's not just the billionaires. They're cleverer than that. They also invite lots of ministers from various governments, finance ministers, foreign ministers, and the like from around the world. Those ministers very often end up quite wealthy. One has to ask why, what's going on. And I would just say following the money is always a worthwhile thing in anything, especially moves like, and again, go back to the global warming movement and the science that was going on. And look at how hard it has been for any global warming skeptic to get funding for their research if they're interested in the science, and how easily large organizations, universities, and what have you, have obtained billions of dollars in funding for their research to confirm global warming theories, climate change theories, the infamous hockey stick, and the whole disaster mongering, fear mongering, we're all going to die genre behind it. And like, as I say, go back to the fact the United Nations, every part of the United Nations has an element that is involved in environmental studies. Basically, they're making money off climate change.
Well, like I said, just never trust a German with a vision of utopian global order. Just say it. We tried it in the 30s. It ain't going to work anymore, any better in the 2020s. So,
of course, around now, the Western government's a little more compliant of what's going on. It seems they enjoy the idea of a great reset. Tim, your theory about the foreign ministers, the finance ministers, might actually hold a lot of weight when it comes to this.
I mean, step into Build Back Better, and who is actually going to make money off it?
That's where I was going here. The Build Back Better program seems to be Biden's adherence to the World Economic Forum. I'll run down a list for you guys, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. First off, first thing Biden does when he takes office, shuts down the Keystone Pipeline project. The immediate and residual effects are still being felt. More unemployment, gas prices, high heat prices, job downsizing, higher sales tax burden. Of course, COVID did have a lot to do with what was going on, but the Keystone Pipeline project really caused the gasoline energy prices to soar, which caused a lot more problems when it came to consumer prices for almost everything else. And yes, it didn't help the supply chain either. What about compliance testing, mask mandates, vaccine mandates? They seem to be a perfect barometer for how strong federal government is and needs to be to allow a great reset to happen. Disarming of the citizenry. Again, the left has been trying to do this for a long time. Britain's done it. They, you know, Tim, it took about almost a century to do so gradually, but they did. The American left is trying to pull this right now as well. Manipulation of currency and economic investments as well. The stronger currencies need to be weakened, and the Great Reset needs a world currency to sustain its elite-based rule. Are cryptos the answer for them? That trend could be dangerous all around too. What are your thoughts on all of that? The Build Back Better, Great Reset, or should I just say the Build Back Reset?
I'll just jump in straight away and just say, as I said before, you look at the Build Back Better bill, you look at the amount of money involved in it, and if you try really hard and track where a lot of that money is going to go, it is not going to go into the pockets of the average citizen. It is going to go to the elites, the owners of the solar panel factories, the owners of the wind turbine factories. Those are the ones that are going to make huge amounts of money, not the way, how can I put it? The average wage is not going to go up. Inflation is more than eating into that now. Gas prices, as you rightly say, Chris, are going up. The whole thing is economically a disaster. And like I say, go to any of these huge bills and ask, where has the money gone, or where is the money planned to go? It's a disgrace. It's disgusting. It's the elites lining their own pockets.
And if I can pile onto that, and this is true of virtually every major economy around the world, but I'll just stick with U.S. numbers. The issue of the increase in money flowing into certain sectors of economies, this is true of virtually every major economy on the planet, but I'll just stick with the United States because it's so glaring. Since right now, the United States has more than $6 trillion in circulation in the major way that the Fed measures money in circulation and in the ready reserve, if you will. In 2009, in January of 2008, that number was a little over 800 billion, and in 12 years, 13 years, it has grown 600%. This is incredible. This is beyond imagination. But more importantly, you have to understand what happens when money gets injected into the economy. When money gets injected in the economy, it gets loaned out, it gets spent, et cetera, and it circulates around and around. And invariably, everybody winds up putting it in a bank, right? The banks, your money sits in banks. No one prints off $100 bills and stacks them on. Well, some people do, but most people don't. Most of that money is listed someplace in a bank, and it goes through multiple because banks can loan out more money than they have, et cetera. But in the long and short of it, this money goes into a bank, and the bank then needs to put it someplace. Banks don't just print it out and put it someplace, put it in their vault. They have safe investments, and safe investments are major companies on various stock exchanges spread out over very large funds, which means that this money gets flushed back into the markets, the stock markets. And so if you look at where the valuation of let's say the Fortune 500 companies, their capitalization of the Fortune 500 companies in the last 12 years, anyone who's paid any attention to it will notice that it has blossomed. It is tremendous. It's again, it's 600, 700% growth. So when you look out and you see Jeff Bezos is worth whatever the heck he is, he's worth 100 some odd billion dollars. That is possible because the federal government has been printing money like someone's going to take away the printing machine. It is an incredible amount of money that is flowing out into the economy, but it invariably winds up getting dumped back into the markets. And there's a very small number of people who are making money, and that money winds up getting dumped back into the markets. And it is worthwhile to remember that there are some people who are benefiting, even as we are going through right now the highest rate of inflation since 1980. Over 7% is the official number. If you calculate the inflation rate in the United States using the same model that we calculated it in 1980, the inflation rate is double that.
And going to get worse.
And it's going to get worse.
Just to add on to what Pete said is, and what's further is he pointed out the first thing that Biden did when he got into office was cancel the XL pipeline. It's because what they're doing is purposeful. This is not by accident. Everything Pete just went through is part of what they're trying to do is create conditions for the better in the Build Back Better, because what you have to do to justify building back is to destroy what you have. And that's exactly what they're engaged in. So when you see the higher gas prices, when you see this dumping, it's easy to justify dumping money into the economy saying you're helping people. Oh, we've got all this money, we're going to help you. No, it's the exact opposite. When you have this level of dumping money into the economy, all it does is create massive inflation. I forecast we're going to see double-digit inflation. We already saw double-digit at the wholesale level. We just didn't see it applied to the retail level. I think it's actually at the retail hiding it. And you're going to see double-digit inflation created by this helping people. Oh, we're going to help you with all this money. It is evil, and it is meant to do the exact opposite of what they say they're trying to do politically. It's again a big lie. Anytime you see politicians trying to say we're trying to create all these funds for all these for the equity of helping those who don't have, it's not to help people. It's to help the elite maintain their power, to increase their. By the way, Bezos, they don't care about, a billion here, a billion there. They don't care, as long as in the long run they will be able to accumulate wealth is what they're doing. All this does is affect us, the people in the middle class, and it's a losing war. It's gotten worse. So it's not about helping people. The money, all these things, this infrastructure bill. Oh yeah, that bridge that fell in Pennsylvania, about a week ago maybe, when Joe Biden was out to talk about that bridge wasn't on the list of bridges to be even looked at by this infrastructure effort. Think about that. This bridge falls. Oh, it wasn't even on the list. Wasn't even one of those they were concerned about, because we are concerned about it because it doesn't matter. They're not really out to fix the infrastructure. They're out to enrich their friends who they're basically using these big funds to pay off.
We've already been through one cycle of this type of attempt to help. The American Recovery Act, Build Back Better, shovel-ready jobs. Shovel-ready jobs is what they're trying to imply when they talk about infrastructure. Shovel-ready jobs, how many people actually improved their lives through a shovel-ready job when we shoveled out almost, hundreds of billions of dollars back in 2012. This is the same thing. It's a scam. You're exactly right, Tony and Pete and Chris. This is all about follow the money. I'll keep hammering that.
And if I can add on to that, and do this and put this in the context of a government which is passing this out. The federal government has been passing out money to the states to fix roads and bridges since the Eisenhower administration. The problem is that money gets sent to the states, and there is virtually no hard control over what the states have to do. The states can take that money and spend it on anything. And so what routinely happens, and you can check this in virtually every state in the union, to a lesser or greater extent. What happens is the money winds up in the legislature and then gets into some state bureaucracy. And the states then spend the money overwhelmingly not on the very boring mundane process of repairing roads, repairing bridges. They spend it on cool new projects. And so what happens is, instead of having someone go and take a look at the bridge and fix the bridge and maintain the bridge, bridges can be maintained. Don't believe this? Ask yourself how it is that the Golden Gate Bridge is still up, or the Brooklyn Bridge is still up, or a whole host of other bridges are still up, because they're iconic and people maintain them. Bridges that are not iconic, bridges that don't have any glitz associated with them, are ignored. The problem here is not that the money isn't available. The problem is the money is misspent. The money is misspent by state governments. Now, if you think that that's a problem, and it is, imagine just how wonderful that would be when the money is coming from a global super governmental organization located 5,000 miles away, and there's virtually no chance that anybody's ever going to reach down into the Department of Public Works in the state of Arkansas and correct them for their behavior. Imagine just how diligent they will be in repairing the bridges and roads then.
Another way for the U.S. government to try to push their Build Back Better and World Economic Forum's Great Reset policies is to circumvent the idea that a lot of people don't want it, and many of these things are unconstitutional. This goes back to a video that we just did, gentlemen, with a group called Keep 9. Court packing is still going to be an issue. It's going to be something that will be mentioned on and off over the next few decades, and was in the last couple decades as well. Tossing around the idea of adding Supreme Court justices might seem radical, silly now, but after repeated stories and mentions by politicians, still, like the universal DH in Major League Baseball, which is coming, the idea is to pound it into people's heads until most Americans either become open to the idea or annoyed and apathetic about it so much that the government can just do it with little resistance. This is why we need that Keep 9 amendment. But the idea is the governments are going to find ways to get around the law of the land to push their to push the Great Reset agenda. Other Western nations have to deal with this as well.
On court packing, I have some very basic questions that I keep asking to anybody who even asks the question about the idea. What is the right number? I mean, if you pack it once, what stops it being packed in the future, and where do you end up? Does it go to 12, 13, 15, 21, 51, 151? Where's the end? If there's political advantage to doing it once, there's political advantage forever. So, as I say, and the other question I have is, we've had 9 justices for 153 years. What have they done wrong in that 153 years, apart from not allow minority views to go forward, unconstitutional views?
Right. I mean, it's a very short list of clearly bad decisions.
Yeah.
But on the other side of it, the idea of packing the Supreme Court, of course, is I would submit a wonderful addition to any model for global governance. Is that you create a whole series of new judges, and you create a mechanism for creating new judges, and then as the power shifts away from the nations and to the global government, the global government would appoint more judges, and those judges would be beholden to emotionally and spiritually, if you will, to the global government and not to anyone else. And of course, once you get into some kind of process of global governance, at what point do you start getting into a situation in which the global government would then say, well, in order to make sure everybody is dealing with this fairly, we're going to take a judge from Arkansas and make him a judge in Japan, and we're going to take a judge from China and make him a judge in the United States, and we're going to take a judge from Brazil and make him a judge in Norway, and that will be more equitable, and very quickly here you have a complete scrubbing of any kind of local input into the law and any kind of local understanding of the law, and we wind up with the, if you will, the Global Economic Forum's view of the law. It just strikes me just as terribly dangerous issue, and another, if you will, brick in that wall that the global government folks want to build around our Constitution.
Thank you for being with us for this very special Great Reset edition of Thought to Action, presented by the Herb London Center for Policy Research. For our next Great Reset program, we're going to discuss how to fight back from the ground level up, the grassroots upward, against the Great Reset. Please remember to hit that like button. Feel free to comment on our discussion. We appreciate your thoughts. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our Thought to Action channel and pound the big red bell for updates on future shows. Find out more about the London Center on our website, londoncenter.org. If you would like to help us continue to create discussions and programming like this, please join us on Patreon, patreon.com/thought-to-action. You can enjoy sneak previews, special exclusive content, and our Ask Us Anything sessions. Also, you can help us greatly by sharing this video with your friends, colleagues, and social networks. For our panel and the Herb London Center for Policy Research, I'm Chris Cordani. Thank you, stay informed, and make your day a great one.